Hello, church family, and today we are in 1 Peter chapter 3. There's some common themes throughout the New Testament that the apostles write about. One of them being the life of Jesus and the meaning for that, for you and for the world. Also, bearing one another burdens, taking care of our sisters and our brothers in Christ as the church family should. But the apostles, all of them, Paul, John, and Peter, write about another subject, and that subject is suffering. And they have a lot of experience to write about this idea of suffering. And so today in verse 13, Peter kind of asks an interesting question. It's kind of funny, I think, because he knows the answer to this question. But he says, now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? Right? He's basically asking, why would anybody want to harm anybody that's trying to do good? But in verse 14, he quickly answers this question. He says, but even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you'll be blessed, right? He's like, it's coming. People are going to treat you wrongly for wanting to do good, right? That's the story of Christ. Christ came to do good and redeem the world. And still, as good as he was, the world cried out for his death. They didn't want it. The world doesn't want good. And so he does, Peter answers this question and says, suffering is coming, right? And you're going to suffer for righteous sake. And there's a lot said in that little verse, that verse 14. And a couple of things to take note of. First of all, he says, you should suffer for righteousness' sake, right? He doesn't say that you're suffering for your sake. And so suffering, when we look at that subject, and this is a hard and not easy to talk about, and a lot of people are dealing with it right now, even during the season, sometimes at a greater deal during the Christmas season, but something that we have to understand as a Christ followers, that our suffering is not about us. It's not about you. And that's hard, that's harsh. Right? That seems wrong to even say because we're the ones experiencing that pain. We're the ones that's experiencing that loneliness. But Peter says that you should suffer for righteousness' sake, right? You got to suffer for something more than you. And secondly, in this verse, he's saying that it leads to something. Our suffering for righteousness leads to blessings. And so our suffering has a purpose. This is what makes a Christian different, right? The rest of the world, all humans are going to suffer, even if you were to avoid hardships. Your whole life, at the end of this life, is death. And that in itself, being a sinful world, a fallen world, death in itself is suffering. All of us as humans are going to suffer. We have common ground with that, with all of those around us. There is common ground on that. But what Peter is saying here through our suffering, when we start to understand that it's not about us and it's about Jesus, there's more purpose to our suffering. As there's a different attitude towards this suffering, and it leads us to this word of hope. And Peter says in verse 15, he says, but if in your hearts honor Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for your hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. So he says, when someone asks about that hope in you, be ready to respond on it. Hope is a powerful tool for a follower's life, right? Like it is the fuel of our testimony. It is what allows us to have purpose and meaning because we have hope in something more than ourselves. Our suffering's not about us, but we get to put another purpose to this suffering in the world. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, someone that also experienced a great deal of suffering, he says to endure the cross is not a tragedy. It is suffering which is in the fruit of the exclusive allegiance to Jesus Christ. When it comes, it is not an accident, but a necessity. Dietrich's saying that it's the way that we experience. It's the fruit of being able to see Jesus fully. Because what did we read in verse 18? Right here it says, for Christ also suffered, the King of the world, in all his glory, suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. Our suffering, when we get to that place and we stop worrying so much about the pain, and it hurts. I'm not trying to belittle that. It hurts. Suffering is awful. But when we start to understand the purpose of our suffering, it leads us to hope. It leads us to seeing Jesus more clearly. It allows us to just be able to have that joy and that peace that so many that's been through so much, even the apostles, get to experience this joy, this peace, this hope in Christ. And through that, we're able to spread that to others in the world. And so our suffering has so much purpose to it. We get to experience Jesus in his fullness, and we get to also see others experience Jesus because of that hope that is found within us. The hope that Jesus provided through his life. I hope each and every one of y'all have a Merry Christmas. We love y'all, and I hope that you spend a lot of time with your family and that you're able to rest in Jesus this season. All right, goodbye.